Welcome, everyone. Glad to be back on another episode of Salesforce Trails and Trials. Today, we're in for a treat as we have Akshay Panse and Omar Youssef. This is a Trailblazer story. We're going to kind of follow their journey and talk a little bit about how they began in technology and the Salesforce ecosystem, and then what problems they're trying to solve with AI and with consulting teams. So I know you'll be interested and lots of good stuff all the way to the end. So welcome, guys. Glad to have you today.
Thanks, John. Thanks
John, it's
for
great to be
having
here.
us.
Yeah, well, first off, I'll just say that for anyone listening to this, um, if you haven't already, let's look at Tahoe Dreamin'. It's coming up next week. So right when you get this episode nearby, you're going to be at that event with me, and we'd love to see any of our audience there. So I want to put that out. But uh, but let's go back, guys. I love talking about how people first found that they were someone that was interested in technology. There's a lot of listeners who may or may not consider themselves technologists, but as we know in today's modern world, really everybody needs to be a technologist in one way or another. And
Yes.
sometimes it comes through surprising and meandering means. And so I'm curious, take us back when you're younger. When did you find that technology was something that you really were interested in?
So I can go first. And in fact, it is more related to me than anybody else, especially in this audience, is because I started my career as a chemical engineer. So I had nothing to do with tech and absolutely no background in IT and computer science. In fact, I was cautiously not trying to go there because everybody was literally in India doing computer science. It's like herd mentality.
Sure.
And I wanted to stand out. So I took the hard way. I started the chemical engineering journey. So I was in fact a plant manager at India's largest inorganic chemical plant called Tata Chemicals, and I was managing 300 people under me. So it was an amazing experience of
Wow.
working with frontline workforce at a very remote location in India. And so I'd been predominantly into the manufacturing sector. I was in the food industry, and then I got into risk consulting, but focused specifically on these kind of industries like manufacturing and then construction and so on and so forth. So I kind of became a specialist in industries which had large frontline workforce. So that was my forte. And so the journey was very curious. So COVID happened in 2020, 21, and I started thinking, reevaluating what I've been doing with my life. And that's when I thought that there's so much of digital transformation challenges which frontline workforce industries face,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they're not able to adapt to tech. There are people working in these industries like construction, facility management, who getting them to download an app and to learn it, especially in parts of India and
Yeah.
in a lot of other developing countries like Middle East and Africa. We saw a big gap there, and they're not able to use out of the box applications. So in fact, I started my first startup in India in 2021, 22, where we started building a no code, low code platform for the construction and the facility management
Okay. That's a
sector.
tough industry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very tough industry, and every company has a process of their own, and it was a huge challenge which we were trying to solve. And COVID kind of inspired it because project managers were not able to go to site and manage their operations. They were
Hmm.
traditionally managing it on Excel and WhatsApp.
Hmm.
And that kind of gave them a boost to say that can we now look at tech to solve because
Hmm.
we don't have any visibility on site. So that was the genesis of me coming from a traditional frontline workforce industry background to tech. And because I did not have background in tech, I partnered with a very close friend of mine, Tejaswin, who's from the IITs. In India, IIT is a big deal. I'm not sure if
Hmm.
you're the
Hmm.
IIT. So he's the techie with whom I partnered, started this company, and we have been running that business successfully for the past 4 years now. Uh,
Okay.
and all the top construction companies in India, few in Middle East, have been using this product.
Okay. Now, I still want to go back and think about what the inception point. So certainly you mentioned that you were kind of almost anti-technology a little bit, though chemistry is, it's close to rocket science. It can be. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, when did you first recognize that chemistry was something you really were interested in? Was it seeing, vinegar and baking soda? Did you experiment at school? Right? Did you see something really unique happen on the internet? Like what got you into that?
Yeah, so curiously, I come from a family of doctors, so I have literally 26 doctors in the family.
Wow.
It's like going to a medical conference when there's a festival. So, so that was basically, and I couldn't get into medical. So the closest I could get was into chemistry. So there's a lot of people who are into biochemistry in my family who are not doctors. So I said, okay, I need to do engineering, and that
Wow.
basically drove me to becoming a chemical engineer.
Yeah,
So
what a standard of excellence in your family if the compromise is getting into chemical engineering,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah. I'm called the black sheep in the house.
wow. That's incredible. And yeah, I'll look forward to hearing more about that. So Omar, I'm curious, tell me a little bit about where did you start out?
Yeah, well, maybe I should have gone first because I can't say that my story will be that interesting. No, but all seriousness, I started off as a business major, and then a semester into college, I kind of was like, this is too easy, so I decided to switch to mechanical engineering, and I became a mechanical engineer. I loved physics, I liked math, and I said, hey, why not? I can do that for fun and get a degree. I was told, critical thinking and all these things will help you,
Mhm.
and it's a general degree. It'll be cool. And then I realized when I got my first few internships, I was having to drive an hour away to a manufacturing plant, and it was not the most flexible, ideal opportunities.
Hmm.
And I joke about this because my entry into consulting was absolutely by chance. About 2 months, 3 months before I was supposed to graduate, one of my buddies, he works still at EY, and he had invited me to, come with him on one of his business trips because we were going to go to do some camping afterwards. But,
Mhm.
we were at the Ritz-Carlton. It was a very, nice experience. And I said, wait, what do I need to do to do exactly this? I like this more than wearing steel toe boots. So help me get there. And honestly, I would just attribute it to just wanting to push through and learn more. And that's how I started my career at Deloitte. They saw a chance in me, and one of the gentlemen that interviewed me was a mechanical engineer, so it was natural. And then once I made it to Deloitte, I stumbled onto Salesforce, also by chance. So, as I got into the door and just working through various enterprise scale projects, they said, "Hey, we're going to put you in the Salesforce practice. You know what that is?" I said, "Absolutely not, but I'm going to figure it out."
Mhm.
And that's how I ended up in the Salesforce world. Having now I work from home and don't have to worry about wearing steel toe boots anymore. So I take that as a
Wow.
win.
Yeah, both you guys kind of made these really key, kind of horizontal pivots, and I'm curious really on that point of what role did you feel that curiosity and your being interested in things that maybe you didn't exactly know where the path might lead, you didn't know what the ROI was for at the point in time, what role did that play in helping you get to a more kind of clarified path to dig into in your career?
Yeah, I can go first.
Yeah.
I would say that I just wanted to have really, I wanted to be in a career that is limitless. I always saw engineering as there's a glass ceiling in terms of how much growth you can get, and then management was an area and skill that was wanting to grow and mature and was able to do pretty quickly. But I just saw engineering as a limiting factor
Hmm.
in terms of where I want to go professionally. And unfortunately, I learned that, or maybe fortunately, until I was too close to graduation. So I also left out the part where I was an aerospace engineer major for a bit as well before I switched to mechanical. So I tried a few different things until I landed on mechanical engineering. But I'll also add that for me, I've always was just curious. I mean, one of the internships I did was I built a access database to manage tools. So this manufacturing plant had a bunch of tools that would get stolen, and all these types of powered tools and various tools that get
Hmm.
vended from different third parties. And they wanted a good way to understand what inventory they had and serialize it. So I literally was like, let me figure out how to do this in Access, and did VBL and all this stuff. And And they're like, "Wow, this is awesome!" And let's like put money behind this project. And I said, "Okay, cool. I'll keep building this." And then that's how I realized that's actually coding, without knowing that it's actually coding.
Hmm.
Because in college, all I took was a Fortran class, and Fortran is such an ancient tool. I'd be surprised if anybody outside of like nuclear plants and I don't know, maybe Southwest Airlines,
Calculators. I think some calculators still use Fortran, right?
perhaps.
Yeah. Wow. And so that's, yeah. So your curiosity and your willingness to kind of dive in, you created kind of a check-in, check-out, a little chain of custody app on Access, right? And so I'm sure all the Microsoft people will nod and be like, okay, good use. Just make sure you stay under 1 million rows, right? And Access, very good. I was a Microsoft guy back in the day, which is great. I'm curious, Akshay, when you think about, curiosity and just, that meandering learning process, what role did that play in kind of helping you get on the track you're on?
Yeah, so while 13 years of my life was not very closer to tech, but technology always played a hand because you end up using various applications in your role. So from manufacturing, I used SAP for my production management and
Hmm.
maintenance management, and then in my consulting role, I was using Salesforce as a an end user, and so I was kind of having a technical expertise in the operation side, and I was able to understand how these applications work. So it was kind of a parallel journey. But when the idea of the first startup came up with regards to building a no code platform for the workforce, which is basically creating workflow applications through
Hmm.
chatbots on WhatsApp. The idea was I looked at various angles of what can I do which can create the maximum impact to
Hmm.
the lives of people, and entrepreneurship was one of the ways. And within entrepreneurship, I said anything which is like a manufacturing construction in itself is very capital intensive. So with the least amount of money, what can I do which will create scale, which can employ a lot of people? And
Hmm.
it naturally happened that I understand this frontline workforce industry, and I know tech can do a lot of value add. And
Hmm.
that curiosity and that kind of experience in the past kind of led me to build the first company. And very curiously, the first company's what to say origin stories became the birth for this second startup around Salesforce. So basically, when we started building the company, implementation became a bottleneck for us
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
the clients we were serving had absolutely no IT teams. So we ended interacting with the clients, understanding their process, and then do the implementation ourselves, setting up custom workflow applications for site
Hmm.
management. And when Gen AI took center stage a year back, we said that, hey, what the humans have been doing, there's a massive potential for these AI agents to do and complement them so
Hmm.
that the implementation can be faster and more efficient. So that was basically the origin story for this second startup.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting, you look at examples like Amazon where they are, they're selling books, they're selling products, and their major problem is scale, right? They're getting popular, there's bursts and peaks, and their infrastructure is struggling to keep up. And so they have to solve that problem. So they end up solving that problem, and then they decide, well, maybe we should monetize our problem and solve other people's problem with the solution that we found. And that now is their biggest product, right?
Yeah,
AWS.
AWS. Yeah.
And so it's interesting because the example you gave, and I'm curious whether Omar has an example as well of, what are some of the problems that you found surfacing in that first business with the, not just that they didn't have implementations. I'm sure you found other challenges that you were having while trying to deliver these implementations. But I'm curious, what were some of those problems that you saw surfacing that maybe stayed with you, residually, so that you could try and figure out ways to monetize that problem at some future iteration.
Yeah. So, Omar, if you have something, or I can continue
Yeah,
with this.
go for it. I think this is related to
The
kind of the
first.
birth of Cloobot. So, but I can definitely
Yeah.
share stuff after.
Sure. So typically what we realize is that when you build software, the biggest challenge is people problem. When you interact, we come from a tech kind of understanding. We know our product, and
Mhm.
the people we are interacting with know their business, and then there's no middle ground there. So you end up interacting with the business user, and each one will not have a complete view of their business. So
Hmm.
then you have to talk to multiple people to kind of get the complete picture of what exactly the business users want.
Hmm.
Sometimes they may not even able to tell things. They would just be very micro focused on what is
Yeah,
their.
it's like looking at facets of a diamond, right? Some
Yeah,
businesses have 8, some businesses have 16,
yeah.
32, 64, right? And the complexity of the business can have hundreds.
Absolutely, and they have always seen Excel, and for them, Excel can do a lot of great magic. But when the aspects of collaboration and the multiple users and permission controls, all of that becomes challenge, and they have grown to a size. That's where they feel that okay, we need to have a system, but they always compare it with Excel. How easy the Excel sheets are.
Sure.
And that's the most trickiest part, that we had to what say have dedicated team sit with them, and multiple these workshops would be conducted to get the requirement scoping right. And then the challenge around information coming in tranches would come in, or there was always be change management, because they are from paper to moving to a tech.
Hmm.
They're trying to learn themselves, and they don't have any best practices in place. So
Hmm.
those were certain challenges that we build something for them, they would use it, and then they say, okay, we need to improve. So change management was a big challenge.
Hmm.
Scope creep would naturally come in, and they would not understand, hey, why would this take so much time? Uh,
Hmm.
those was another challenge. So we ended up having proper documentation, sign-offs in place.
Hmm.
Although we had a no-code tool, but these things would drag on for months.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Everybody's prior experience informs their future desires, right? And it's a
yeah,
challenge with an immature organization that's like everything they're looking at is new and exciting and opens up all of these beautiful echelons of
yeah,
new needs, you know?
Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting how Akshay's story probably resonates with a lot of folks in the Salesforce space, even though it's a completely different platform. And
Hmm.
I think the reality, I think Akshay said it beautifully, was the intersect of a technology platform and people. It's not always a one size fits all, and there's a lot of massaging, a lot of
Hmm.
conversations that are required. And in my own experience, that's one of the biggest points of failure in any sort of implementation or digital transformation is translating what the business is looking for and ultimately figuring out what does that look like from a technology tooling,
Hmm.
change management and all that good stuff. So it requires architects and BAs and folks that really understand the industry, understand the platform, know what to ask and what not to ask, and how
Hmm.
to manage the client expectation. There's a lot that's hinged upon people, and there's a lot of risk associated with that as companies try to scale. And I'm sure Akshay, you'll share a little bit more about how you tried to scale your previous company and some of the bottlenecks you faced.
Yeah, well, I think to highlight what you're talking about, I mean, the research that I've done across 25,000 plus projects over 3 decades, the number one cause of failure that results in 45 to 95% of those projects failing is communication.
yeah,
All top five causes are all non-technical in nature, right? So their communication, disagreement on what the future state looks like, right? Improper project management controls, right? There's so many things that come into play that are really about the people, and you have such high variance with companies, even companies in the same industry, the same size, the same number of people. You have a wide variety of acumen, prior experience, whether people have actually done any of this stuff before and they're familiar with it, how open they are to receiving suggestions from other people. There's a lot there. And so I think you're right. People very much identify with this as a common challenge. And I interrupted you. Please continue.
yeah. So basically, that was where we ended up becoming in a very tight spot, because each time we onboarded a client, it would take 4 to 5 months per process to get this set up, and it was impacting the growth of our company. Uh,
Hmm.
in fact, when we tried to raise VC capital, they said that hey, you have all the top construction companies as your clients, but if you end up having 4 to 5 months of implementation every time, how are you going to scale? So we kind of became a productized product come service company.
Hmm.
So we said that okay, why don't we try using LLMs, because today LLMs have the ability to mimic human behavior, and try to see how can we make this process more efficient. We did some POC, went back to the VCs and said that in the future everything can be automated and people just tell what they want. There's an AI which can then talk to them and get their requirements documented, get a human kind of approval in place, and then do the magic and do the automatic setup in the system so that it no longer will be so painful as it is currently. And the VCs were just listening to us and they said that this is such a brilliant idea. And you should actually look at building this as a company in itself, because this is a massive pain point for so many product companies out there. And that became the origin story for Cloobot Inc. In US.
Interesting. So tell me the origin of Cloobot. That's Cloobot.
Yeah.
And where does where does the name come from? How did you come up with that?
So it was multiple things. So there was a combination of cluster and collaborate. So we kind of fused it, and then basically it was a chatbot on WhatsApp for the first company. So the bot kind of thing was
Okay,
it.
I
So
see.
so we kind of stuck with that name, and so while the first company in India is Cloobot Tech Labs, the one in India is in US is Cloobot Inc.
I
So we
see.
kind of have the same product, and the product in US is basically called Cloobot X, which was Accelerate, or the
Hmm.
Excel version of the product. So there are so many curious cues which we have left with the name.
Okay. And when the word cluster is in there, is that because you want to help people avoid a cluster of a project? Is that?
Yeah, so it was cluster is basically from the that multiple people can
Yeah.
collaborate, and from that
That was a
perspective.
little bit of a joke because
Yeah.
there's a negative term about what many projects turn into, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it can mean multiple things, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So so this is very interesting. So you've had this a similar iteration of this product kind of running in India for a bit,
Yeah, yeah.
actually, and even outside the Salesforce space,
Yes, yes.
right?
It was the completely non-Salesforce.
Okay.
And then when we started this idea, we tried to see which product is the largest market. And then we realized that the CRM space will be the most interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because unlike an ERP, the level of complexity is relatively less. And,
Mm-hmm.
because it is touching the sales and marketing function,
Mm-hmm.
organizations would tend to always make changes and
Mm-hmm.
enhancement, because sales is a very dynamic process. So a tool like this would make a lot of sense for the CRM space was the hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, what is the biggest product out there which we can basically
Sure.
keep to? So that's where we then zeroed in on Salesforce. So
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think another aspect about Salesforce, I always use the analogy of like Legos, is
yeah,
that Salesforce, you can build with Legos something amazing, right? Stable, strong, beautiful. But you can also, because it's so flexible, you can also build something that is incredibly ugly and falls apart and can't support any weight, and nobody can recognize what it is.
yeah,
And we've all seen projects like that on Salesforce too,
yeah,
and so it's interesting about how not just choosing CRM as a category, but specifically Salesforce, because there is a higher risk that the people who are delivering the product have there's more risk and more opportunity for them to get it wrong because the guardrails are so small.
yes, very true. So that was the idea behind we think that simpler products like HubSpot may not need so much of a level of capabilities, but
Hmm.
definitely Salesforce would be the most ideal one of the lot.
Okay, and so so interesting. So how did you guys say how you two met?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting story again. So I'm a big believer in the book Think and Grow Rich. I'm not
Uh-huh.
sure if you've read that.
Hmm.
And one of the things it says is that specialized knowledge and mastermind. So these are the cornerstones of growing rich. And so all the specialty skill sets which you don't possess, it need not be you need to know everything, but you can
Hmm.
always find the people who can basically bring that skill sets, complement each other, and
Hmm.
you can create something beautiful out of it. So
Hmm.
that's where I found Tejas, who's the tech genius, and I basically come from a sales and business background. And
Hmm.
when we were trying to build something for Salesforce, we were trying to see, okay, how do we find people who would like the idea? And in fact, one of the other reasons why we chose Salesforce was the amazing Trailblazer community.
Hmm.
We reached out to all the people across NetSuite, ServiceNow, Salesforce, and then kind of for some reason Salesforce has done some magic with this community, because
Yeah.
we've so many people helping us out and giving us inputs. So we wanted someone who can help us build this ideal product, and we didn't have Salesforce know-how. So we had good tech capabilities and business understanding, but nothing to do with Salesforce.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we try to find someone as an advisor who can help us and believe in what we are building. And we
Yes.
fortunate to find Omar in that journey.
Okay, well, let me just take a minute here to shout out because I know many of you are listening, but that shout out that Akshay mentioned there about the Salesforce community, so that's a shout out to every user group leader, to every Dreamin' event organizer, right? To those who create those on the margins events at Dreamforce and at TDX, who spend their time going and creating, the BA events, right? There's a lot of volunteer work in there to create what we have in this community, and so well done to you and Akshay. I appreciate you recognizing and seeing that difference among other products and what a significant part this makes. And so another shout out for Tahoe Dreamin', as well as Texas Dreamin', Florida Dreamin', Southeast Dreamin'. They're all coming later this year, and you should all support them to keep sponsoring and helping people like Akshay recognize how special the Salesforce ecosystem is. So I just want to give a shout out to all those people because many of them will hear this podcast, and they really do special work.
Absolutely. So that's where Omar basically joined us and has been helping us. So maybe Omar, you can talk a bit about that experience.
Yeah. From my perspective, Akshay had DM'd me on LinkedIn amongst a slew of other DMs that I usually get. But I try to look at what people are sending, and a lot of it is people trying to sell me different products or some
Mhm.
service. But when I read the message, it was intriguing. It was something along the lines of, "Hey, my name is Akshay. Co-founder of this company, and we are building this very cool product, and this is why. Would you be open to just having a conversation? Would love to tell you more about it." Just very, very high level, just more of a feeler. And I said, "Hey, that sounds really cool. Let's have a call." This had to be, I don't know, August of last year, so it's been a while. And when we met, and the team was essentially, just heads down, building and trying to figure out what is the exact item that they want to focus on
Mhm.
to solve this, whatever all the problems that are faced in the Salesforce space. There's a lot of problems, but what is the key area that is relevant? And it became very clear to me that these folks had a lot of technical acumen, as well as just business know-how.
Mhm.
And as Akshay mentioned earlier, him and I really connected in a lot of different ways. And just his skill set, my skill set were very complementary. And, it just allowed us to, be able to operate at a efficiency level that, I mean, I haven't seen before. And obviously, you have our team in India. So the ability to just churn and work through, ideas and iterations, and, hypothesis, and kind of validate the hypothesis, and, to establish design partnerships, like just the methodology, really impressed me in kind
Mhm.
of the rigor that they have, and just their ability to kind of found a company, number two, and coming to the US, and getting into an accelerator program. I
Sure.
think after a few calls, it became more of, "Hey, do you want to be an advisor?" I said, "Absolutely. Like, where do I sign?"
Sure.
kind of thing. So yeah, that's how it all started.
Nice. That's cool. And you guys gave me I actually learned a little bit about this product a couple months ago at a much earlier state. And as I went through and just kind of, because I still have a consulting organization, is one of the companies that I run, and so I thought it was fascinating how, right, you focus on, at least at the time, right, you were focusing on the discovery side and
Yeah,
really making sure to kind of understand the right target, right, before everybody builds the apparatus to correctly aim,
yeah.
and then eventually, right, to fire at a pace that the client is willing and able to accept. And so I'm curious why, there's, as you mentioned, Omar, there's a lot of potential landing, landing areas in the Salesforce consulting process that need to be improved. And so I'm curious, why did you pick this, the front part of the project?
Actually, do you want me to answer that, or do you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
take
yeah.
that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, John, just kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, a lot of the failure points that I've seen in my own career, whether it's working at a large GSI or even working at a small boutique firm, is always revolved around understanding the client's needs and are demonstrating what that actually means into, technical user stories and acceptance criteria that can be handed to a developer to build against. And where you see a lot of friction points, again, these are, discovery takes a long time, and the talent required to support discovery are expensive, right? You can't really offshore a lot of those skill sets, at least not very well. So it tends to be pretty pricey. Customers push back on duration, and oftentimes there's gaps in our team's understandings of what the solution needs to look like, resulting in further ramifications down in the build process and missed requirements and client contention. So when you look at it from a customer success standpoint, that is probably the first opportunity to kind of try to solve this. And I like to kind of compare this era of AI in general, at least in the context of professional services, to when offshoring became a thing a couple decades ago. It was this new concept. It had its problems. It had its inefficiencies at first. But once the processes and tooling made sense, and obviously internet and all that, became more widespread across the globe, we became a global economy in general, and by extension, that's where the offshore model came, and it brought in a lot of efficiencies for organizations. Some of that cost savings went down to customers, and it was obviously successful because it still exists. Now, I liken that to the era of Gen AI and AI in general, supporting what the onshore teams are doing today, because you can't offshore those resources.
Hmm.
So having efficiency tools to support those individuals to deliver higher quality, to deliver at a larger efficiency, is definitely a win-win, and we see that as the higher ROI component for both professional services organizations as well as end customers that have their own internal IT organizations.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And one of the elements that I talk about a lot is I was actually allergic to AI like for the first couple years, right, that I began hearing about it because the hype was about essentially autonomous replacement, the trek towards artificial general intelligence and achieving what, the Dartmouth conference in the 1950s said, we want parity with human thought, and I have a lot of people first priorities. And I'm
Right,
like, I
right.
don't care if a machine could think the same way as another person. There's a tremendous amount of empathy and human characteristics that I want to be present as part of that reasoning. And so, one thing I thought was fascinating about your product is rather than it being focused on being fully this autonomous product, it's much more focused on being an assistive product, an accelerating product. And I even in an element around kind of gap analysis, like, because not everybody, even on the consultant side, we may not know sometimes the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
Or right, the we don't know what we don't know about some of the gaps that we may have about this industry or about this particular feature area. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the analogy I like to use is how do you put a cape on someone rather than grant an escape for someone, right? And I'm curious about your thoughts, and what you're looking to achieve there.
Yeah, I would say kind of, you said it beautifully, and the goal here is to provide the human-centric approach around these kinds of tools. So when we look at kind of what Cloobot allows for is, when you look at a project from A to Z, or from, kickoff to kicking off build, there's a lot of steps that have to go into that. And we've built a lot of human input mechanisms in the process to course correct and get the system on track. But more importantly, what tools like Cloobot will allow is giving that customer that experience they deserve. Now, instead of having to create mundane activities for individuals and team members, they can spend that time with customers. I mean, when you look at it from a sales standpoint, that was a huge reason why companies bought CRMs and bought all these efficiency tools, because the whole premise was you want to have your sellers be in front of the customer and delight the customer, and ultimately drive that value and convince them to buy whatever service or product that you're selling. I'd argue it's the exact same thing while delivering solutions. Every single person on the project is a seller in themselves. They sell themselves, the capabilities of the company and what they're doing on the project. So allowing folks to be more confident in what the system, basically because the system is providing that guardrail for them, and also taking away a lot of the mundane tasks that they're having to do, they can spend more face time with the customer, asking the right questions, getting the feedback quickly, and reducing that friction and building that trust and dependability, that ultimately, it becomes a win-win.
Nice. Akshay, any comments on that as well?
So, I mean, the way we see this AI tool, I mean, we have this internal thing saying that think of these like junior BA, a junior architect, a junior admin. So basically helping them doing the groundwork, maintaining the documentation, and so that a lot of times, and because again, coming back to my what's say family heritage of medical science, the best analogy is that when you look at a surgeon, or the basically when a surgeon is going to go into the operations room, there's the whole army of junior doctors and nurses who have already done the prep work, opened up the patient, and the surgeon just focuses on the skill set the person is known for, does their job, and then gets out of the room, and then they can basically then handle more number of surgeries. So similarly, every expert here, or basically the people who are front ending these conversations, the BAs and the architects, then they can basically just focus on interacting with humans and managing the change management, discovering the unknowns, and have this system to as a fallback. It is trying to give suggestions, it is identifying gaps, trying to analyze huge volumes of information which would take weeks together. Oftentimes the business user would just dump information, and then they had to then go through a week of time to read that, go back to the client, ask questions, and then this cycle would unnecessarily get dragged. Today, you can just dump the call transcripts to the AI. It can quickly analyze it and instantly start asking relevant questions. So there's so much of efficiency this process can bring in, and save time for these valuable resources.
Yeah, very good. I mean, certainly this is this assistive kind of accelerating element is something that is very easy for people to try.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, maybe you can think of do you have any anecdotes, any stories that maybe had some surprising outcomes, right? Maybe there was a particular challenge or there was something really valuable that was buried down and somebody might have missed it. But right, you were able to kind of surface that and really help them look like a superstar
Yeah.
in that
So
project.
yeah,
I,
Umar,
I
you
I
can
actually
say
have
it,
a
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
I have a story that comes to mind. Yeah, so
yeah.
we were doing a POC with this organization. They're in the financial services sector, and one of their one basically they want to do this enhancement to their Salesforce. They've been on Salesforce for a few years, and they were wanting to basically take this spreadsheet and put it into Salesforce. I mean, essentially automate that process and add some governance. So you could almost think of this as a non-standard functionality. You're building few custom objects, all these other things. But long story short, at the end of the day, they had all these dependencies that they didn't think were dependencies. Like for example, they want to do all this field audit trail and all these things. But when you look at kind of the limits of Salesforce or even limits of Shield, we quickly realized through the AI that you even can't use those tools, and you have to actually custom build some of that audit trail mechanisms. And I thought that was pretty impressive. That even as somebody that's been in Salesforce for a long time, some of these like small nuances that you might be thinking, okay, we have 20 fields that we can do audit trail on a standard object, or 60 fields in Shield. But having AI basically kind of fact check and kind of get you back on track,
Yeah,
and
so
even
it
propose.
found a topic and then it found some
Yeah.
limits that topic
Yes.
exceeded.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it proposed an alternative solution to tracking the changes and how to add some governance in that. But I will save you the boring details of the exact architecture. But it was the client was very, very satisfied.
Yeah, I mean that's a fascinating element because it not only discovered like what was said, but then it also highlighted the implications of what was said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a nice wingman, right?
It is.
In the
It's a good
process.
way. Yeah, that's a good word. It's a wingman.
Yeah, very interesting. Did you have another one, Akshay, you wanted to share?
Um, so I mean, we recently also supported a facility management company which is into cleaning services, and very small business. And so the biggest challenge there is that they're growing rapidly. They're growing three times their revenue every year. In fact, the situation is so bad that they are leaving money on the table. So oftentimes the work which they have been doing ad hoc was not even getting invoiced because it was there was no systems in place. And they knew that a simple tool will not be able to cater to all the requirements they have. So they had challenges in managing their leads, their opportunities, the entire customer contract lifecycle management in general. And then they have these field service teams also which they have to manage. They looked at Salesforce. We were able to advise them on why Salesforce would be a good product for them. It was a very interesting journey of how we were able to use the AI tool, and the budgets are very low for it's a very small business. It actually cut down a lot of human effort and made the process efficient for them to be able to afford a product like Salesforce.
Yeah,
That
that's a really good point, actually. That's a very good point. Yeah. A lot of these SMB customers that are not going to Salesforce because of the perceived cost of not just licensing, but also implementations.
Hmm.
Tools like this and consulting firms that use tools like Cloobot will be able to deliver quicker and cheaper and bring more value. So this unlocks a whole other segment of potential customers for Salesforce.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, certainly, there's aspects of this that we need to immerse ourselves in and find out what actually will work, right? What helps maximize our teams and bring the most value. I like the emphasis on, right, how do we bring the most value to the client and increase our face time? Because there's so many aspects here that are tribal knowledge that sometimes, unless you're doing a diary study or you're sitting with someone watching what they do, they actually don't even remember the process that they follow because they just do it. They've been doing it for years. And if they just told it to you in a boardroom, they probably would skip multiple steps. And so
Yeah.
having that ability to sit with them, have the FaceTime, see the incredible work that they're doing, how fragmented it is, how they get interrupted, right? You get all these other aspects that you can appreciate. I have a professional development program called People First Method as well, and we call that turning chaos into compliments. There's lots of ways to validate what people are doing and bring that in with enthusiasm and momentum into the new project. And that you're talking about giving people more time to be able to have those kind of engagements, those kinds of interactions, which can't help but improve the outcomes on these projects. So we have about 5 minutes left here. I'm curious as far as if people wanted to dig in and connect with you guys, learn more, how should they do that? And do you have any suggested next steps for our audience as it relates to, kind of supporting your efforts and inquiring about this product that you're bringing to market to help put a cape on more professionals in the Salesforce consulting space?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. We can be reached out on our website, cloobot.ai. It's CLOOBOT.ai. So people can visit and we have a contact us form. So please reach out to us via that. And you can check out CloobotX on LinkedIn to search us and we can connect on that channel as well. And Omar, anything you would like to add as well?
Yeah, and in terms of tangibles, we have several uh, packages that we've put out there for both Salesforce customers as well as consulting firms and even independent consultants. So definitely check out our website. So those details are there. They're also on our LinkedIn. I'm happy to discuss with any organization kind of what they're looking for. I really look at the independent consultant space as a really big opportunity because this is going to be an opportunity for 1 to 2 person shops delivering at scales of 10 to 20 people, and even scale that up. I'll make a bold statement to say that there will be consulting firms that are AI first that have 10 people that deliver more than what a 100 to 200 person consultancy does today, and that's because they've intentionally hired those 10 people and they've enabled them with the right tools and processes and automation to basically deliver at a rate that's extremely quick, at a high value, and just delivering with value and speed.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a big claim, Omar, and I'm sure Certainly, I was reading an article the other day that talked about AI. Essentially, in a nutshell, it said that the future is for founders. That ultimately, the emergence of the AI will bear a lot of the risk that the company organization does today. And so, because of that, many people will step out and begin being able to do what they do on an individual, solo, or 1 or 2 person basis because AI helps equip them in the ways that the company used to. which is a really fascinating aspect. And you've just given an example of how you can support that, which is great. A lot of Salesforce professionals right now who've been looking for work for 2 years are looking just to become independent consultants as a
Yeah.
way to continue making a difference and finding some traction in the ecosystem. Well, Trey, well, thank you for spending your time. Thank you for being sponsors at Tahoe Dreamin'. I look forward to seeing you there and hope many others listening will also meet you guys and see you there. And thank you so much for sharing your story and for participating in making the Salesforce ecosystem better. We hope we offer you best of success for your product, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, John. This was
Thank you,
interesting
John, and
and
see you next
fun.
week.
See you next week. Bye for now,
Yeah,
guys.
see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.